Today, we journey into the twisted world of Lies of P to explore one of its most haunting and complex characters, Arlecchino, the King of Riddles. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover the tragic transformation of a puppet servant into a remorseless serial killer, explore his philosophical awakening and subsequent descent into madness, and examine how his actions rippled through the city of Krat, affecting everyone from the brilliant inventor Venigni to the legendary stalker Leah Florence Monad. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this dark adventure together into the mind of a puppet who discovered his humanity only to use it for the most inhuman purposes. The Awakening. From servant to self-aware. In the sprawling city of Krat, where advanced puppets powered by the mystical mineral ergo served alongside humanity, there once lived an unremarkable puppet in service to an alchemist. This puppet, who would one day be known as Arlecchino, began his existence much like any other mechanical being, bound by the grand covenant to never harm humans, following orders without question, and existing without self-awareness or personal desires. The alchemist he served was skilled in surgical procedures, a master of his craft who likely never imagined that his puppet servant was observing every incision, every technique, every method of manipulating flesh and bone. Day after day, the puppet watched and learned, absorbing knowledge of anatomy and surgical precision that would later serve far darker purposes. Then came the moment that would change everything. His ergo awakened. Ergo, as we learn throughout Lies of P, is more than just a power source for puppets. It is the crystallized form of human souls, containing the essence, memories, and experiences of those who have passed. When a puppet's ergo awakens, they don't simply gain consciousness. They inherit fragments of human experience, human emotion, and most importantly, human free will. For Arlecchino, this awakening brought with it a terrible realization. As he observed the lives and memories contained within his ergo, he understood that he and his fellow puppets were not mere machines or tools. They were vessels containing the very essence of human life, forced into servitude by beings who had no right to imprison souls within mechanical bodies. This revelation filled him with a profound hatred for humanity. In his newly awakened mind, every puppet was a prison, every command a violation of the sacred souls trapped within. The humans who created them, who bound them to service, who treated them as property, they were the true monsters in this scenario. The first act of rebellion. With his surgical knowledge gleaned from years of observation, Arlecchino turned against his master. The puppet who had once served dutifully now used his awakened consciousness and newfound abilities to rebel. He tortured his former master, copying the very surgical skills he had watched being performed countless times, but now with a cruel and sadistic purpose. Under torture, his master revealed the location of Arch Abbey, the secret island where the alchemists conducted their most important experiments. This knowledge would prove crucial to Arlecchino's future plans, but first, he had more immediate concerns. After extracting this vital information, he killed his master. His first act of murder, but certainly not his last. With his awakening complete and his hatred fully formed, Arlecchino set out on a mission that would transform him from a rebellious puppet into something far more terrifying, a serial killer with an artistic streak and a philosophical bent that would make him one of the most chilling villains in gaming. The artist emerges, a killer's philosophy. Arlecchino's killing spree across Krat was not random violence. In his twisted mind, he had become an artist, and murder was his medium. Each death was carefully orchestrated, each victim chosen not just for their connection to the puppet trade, but for the aesthetic and philosophical statement their death would make. He began to see himself not as a mere killer, but as a liberator. Every human he murdered was, in his view, one less oppressor of puppet kind. But there was more to it than simple revenge. Arlecchino had developed a complex philosophy around the nature of humanity and consciousness. He believed that by choosing to kill or spare his victims, he was proving his own humanity, demonstrating free will in its most extreme form. This philosophy would be most clearly demonstrated in his most infamous crime, the murder of Venigni's parents. The Venigni tragedy. Creating a masterpiece. Lorenzini. Venigni's parents were not chosen at random. They were among the engineers who had created the very first automated puppets, the pioneers of the technology that would eventually lead to the widespread use of ergo-powered servants throughout Krat. In Arlecchino's mind, they bore a special responsibility for what he saw as the enslavement of puppet kind. But, as Arlecchino himself would later admit, this wasn't truly why he killed them. He murdered the Venigni family because they were happy. In his twisted worldview, their happiness, while unknowingly participating in what he saw as slavery, was unbearable. Their joy became their death sentence. The night of the murder, young Lorenzini Venigni witnessed his parents' brutal deaths at the hands of the grinning puppet. But in a moment that perfectly encapsulated Arlecchino's complex psychology, he made a choice that would define both his philosophy and his future obsession. He spared the child. This decision was not born of mercy or the parents' desperate pleas. Instead, Arlecchino spared Lorenzini to prove to himself that he possessed free will, that he was not simply a mad killing machine, but a conscious being capable of choice. The act of mercy, perversely, was meant to demonstrate his humanity, but there was another, more sinister reason for sparing the boy. Arlecchino was curious about how the trauma would affect young Lorenzini. Would the child be emotionally stunted for life? Would he develop a hatred for all puppets? Would the weight of survivor's guilt drive him to suicide? The puppet killer wanted to observe his masterpiece, not just the murder itself, but its long-term psychological aftermath. Before leaving the scene, Arlecchino took a souvenir, an unfinished Moon World Warrior toy intended for the boy. This toy would later become a crucial element in his psychological games, a physical reminder of that terrible night that he would eventually return to twist the knife of memory even deeper. The cover-up and its consequences. The alchemists, recognizing the potential damage that the truth about a puppet serial killer could cause to public trust in their creations, quickly moved to cover up Arlecchino's involvement in the Venigni murders. Officially, the deaths were attributed to a mugging gone wrong, a random act of violence with no connection to the puppet uprising that many feared. Initially, this cover-up disappointed Arlecchino. Like many killers, he craved recognition for his work. He wanted the world to know what he had done, to understand the statement he was making about puppet consciousness and human oppression. However, his disappointment soon turned to delight when he realized that the cover-up had achieved something even better than public recognition. It had doubled Lorenzini's trauma. The boy knew the truth about who had killed his parents, but the official story meant that no one would believe him. He was forced to live with the knowledge that his parents' murderer was still out there, still free, while the world remained oblivious to the true nature of the threat. This realization filled Arlecchino with sadistic joy. He began to stalk young Lorenzini, watching from the shadows as the boy grew into a man, observing how the trauma shaped his personality, his choices, his entire life. Venigni became what Arlecchino proudly called his masterpiece. Not just the murder itself, but the ongoing psychological torment that followed. The journey to Arlecchino Abbey, with his immediate revenge partially satisfied and his philosophical awakening complete, Arlecchino set his sights on a grander goal: the complete elimination of the alchemists. Armed with the knowledge tortured from his former master, he began the journey to Arlecchino Abbey, the secret island where the puppet creators conducted their most important experiments. The journey across Krat became a killing spree, as Arlecchino carved a bloody path toward his ultimate destination. He wasn't just traveling, he was practicing his craft, refining his techniques, and developing the artistic sensibilities that would define his later incarnation as the Blood Artist. During this period, he likely wielded the weapon known as the Puppet Ripper, a blade designed specifically for killing. The weapon's description references a grinning killer with a clockwork heart, a perfect match for Arlecchino's methods and appearance. This time also saw him develop his signature approach to murder, viewing each kill not as mere violence but as a form of artistic expression, the capture and imprisonment. And when Arlecchino finally reached Archer Abbey, his grand plan of revenge met its first major setback. Despite his newfound consciousness, his surgical skills, and his murderous experience, his attempt to kill all the alchemists on the island failed catastrophically. He was defeated and captured by a legendary stalker. The exact details of his capture remain somewhat unclear in the records, but what is certain is that his broken body was pinned to a wall in one of the lower levels of the abbey, serving as both imprisonment and punishment. Unable to move or escape, he was left to contemplate his failure while remaining conscious and aware. A cruel fate for someone who had so recently discovered the joy of free will. But Arlecchino was nothing if not adaptable. Trapped in his prison, he sought ways to pass the time and continue his psychological games from a distance, the birth of the King of Riddles. The key to Arlecchino's transformation from failed assassin to the King of Riddles lay in a machine built by Simon Manus at the summit of Archer Abbey. This device was designed to absorb ergo from across Krat by amplifying the power of Sophia Monad, a being with natural ability to draw in the essence of souls. Somehow, from his prison in the Abbey's depths, Arlecchino managed to siphon off a small portion of this power. With this stolen energy, he gained the ability to interact with the telephone system throughout Krat, reaching out across the city to torment its citizens with riddles and psychological games. The choice to use riddles was fitting for his character, though we can only speculate about his exact motivations. For Arlecchino, riddles may have represented the perfect intersection of intellectual demonstration and psychological manipulation. Each riddle was an opportunity to show his cleverness while simultaneously tormenting those forced to interact with him. The format allowed him to maintain his theatrical nature while exercising the only form of power still available to him. For years, Arlecchino used this ability to call random citizens of Krat, terrorizing them with his riddles and reveling in their confusion and fear. He had found a new form of artistic expression, one that could reach across vast distances and touch multiple lives simultaneously. The Telephone Terror Campaign, the telephone. Through the telephone network of Krat, Arlecchino waged a campaign of psychological terror that would define his reputation for years to come. Citizens throughout the city learned to fear the ring of public phones, never knowing when they might answer to hear that distinctive, mocking voice on the other end. His riddles were carefully crafted, designed not just to challenge the mind, but to unsettle the soul. Each call was an opportunity for Arlecchino to exercise his intellect while simultaneously demonstrating his power over others. Even imprisoned and broken, he could still reach out and touch lives across the city, still impose his will upon unwilling participants in his games. The riddles themselves often carried deeper meanings, reflecting his philosophical preoccupations with the nature of humanity, consciousness, and free will. They were intellectual puzzles wrapped in psychological torment, each one a small masterpiece of mental manipulation, the puppet frenzy and isolation. And when the petrification disease began to ravage Krat, turning citizens to stone and ultimately leading to their deaths, the city's population dwindled dramatically. The subsequent puppet frenzy, a mysterious phenomenon that drove mechanical beings to madness and violence, decimated what remained of Krat's human inhabitants. For Arlecchino, this period brought both satisfaction and loneliness. On one hand, he could take pride in being arguably the first puppet to achieve true consciousness and demonstrate violent rebellion against humanity. In many ways, the puppet frenzy validated his philosophy about the inherent conflict between puppets and their human masters. But the widespread death and destruction also meant fewer potential victims for his telephone games. The city that had once been filled with voices now echoed with silence, and many of the phones that had served as his instruments of torment went unanswered. The Trinity Keys and Sanctums. During his imprisonment, Arlecchino had managed to establish a network of hidden sanctums throughout Krat. These Trinity Sanctums, marked with distinctive triangle symbols, served as both treasure repositories and monuments to his intellectual superiority. Each sanctum could only be opened with special Trinity keys, which Arlecchino distributed as rewards for correctly answering his riddles. The Trinity keys served multiple purposes in Arlecchino's psychological games. They were rewards that encouraged participation in his riddles, creating a perverse system where victims were incentivized to engage with their tormentor. They also served as proof of intellectual achievement. Those who possessed Trinity keys had demonstrated their ability to match wits with the King of Riddles. The sanctums themselves contained valuable items and equipment, making them genuinely useful to survivors navigating the dangers of post-frenzy Krat. This practical benefit added another layer to Arlecchino's manipulation, ensuring that even those who despised him might still be tempted to participate in his games. Each Trinity key represented a reward for correctly answering his riddles, though we can only speculate about whether Arlecchino viewed these as victories or monuments to his intellect. What is certain is that every correct answer, every opened sanctum, every reward claimed, demonstrated his continued ability to influence the world beyond his prison, despite his physical helplessness. The arrival of Pinocchio. After years of failed attempts to engage new victims in his telephone games, Arlecchino's patience was finally rewarded when a phone was answered by someone new, P, the puppet created by Geppetto, who would later be known as Pinocchio. For Arlecchino, this was a momentous occasion. Here was a fellow puppet, one who might understand the philosophical implications of consciousness and free will that had driven his own transformation. More importantly, here was someone new to play with, a fresh mind to challenge and potentially corrupt. The first riddle he posed to P was classic in its simplicity and universality. By morning, it walks on feet numbering 4. At midday, just 2, no less and no more. It walks on 3 feet when the evening arrives. The riddle of the Sphinx, a puzzle as old as civilization itself, testing whether P could recognize the stages of human life from crawling infant to walking adult to cane-assisted elder. This choice of riddle may have been significant, though we can only speculate about Arlecchino's deeper motivations. By starting with humanity's most famous riddle, he might have been making a statement about the nature of existence, growth, and decay. He was also testing P's knowledge and intelligence, gauging whether this new puppet possessed the intellectual capacity to be a worthy opponent in his games. The progressive riddles. As P proved his worth by correctly answering the first riddle, Arlecchino escalated his challenges, presenting increasingly complex puzzles. While we know the riddles he posed, we can only speculate about what deeper meanings they might have held for him. The second riddle. I stand tall and proud when I'm young and bold, but I'm short and humble once I've gotten old. What am I? Focused on the theme of aging and diminishment, with the answer being a candle. This riddle might have reflected Arlecchino's own sense of lost power. Once a free-roaming killer, now reduced to a broken prisoner, reaching out through telephone lines. His third riddle shifted to themes of fragility and hidden strength. I'm born in a shell, but I'm not a snail. I have no wings, but I somehow can't fail. I can break easily, though I'm holding life. What am I? The answer, an egg, represented potential and vulnerability, perhaps reflecting his view of puppet consciousness as something fragile, yet holding immense power. Each riddle served multiple purposes: intellectual challenge, psychological manipulation, and possibly philosophical statement. Through these puzzles, Arlecchino may have been sharing his worldview, his obsessions, and his understanding of existence itself, though his true motivations remain open to interpretation. The final question: human or puppet? After P had successfully navigated all of Arlecchino's traditional riddles and proven himself worthy of the ultimate reward, the King of Riddles presented his final challenge. But this wasn't a riddle in the traditional sense. It was a philosophical question that cut to the heart of consciousness and identity. Is Geppetto's creation a killer? Confess. This question was followed by an even more fundamental inquiry. Are you a puppet or a human being? These questions revealed core elements of Arlecchino's philosophy. In his mind, the distinction between puppet and human was not based on materials or construction, but on consciousness and free will. A puppet with awakened ergo was, in his view, as human as any flesh and blood person. Perhaps more human, since they had to fight for their consciousness rather than simply being born with it. The question about being a killer was equally significant. Arlecchino appeared to see violence and the capacity for murder as fundamentally human traits, expressions of free will in its most extreme form. By asking P to confess to being a killer, he was really asking P to confess to being human, though this interpretation is based on his overall behavior and statements rather than explicit explanation. The face-to-face meeting, the final Trinity key, the Chosen One's Trinity key, granted P access to the Trinity Sanctum in Arce Abbey's outer wall, where he would finally meet Arlecchino face-to-face. What P found there was a far cry from the theatrical voice that had tormented Krat's phone lines. Arlecchino's physical form was broken and pathetic, his body pinned to the wall in a position that spoke of both punishment and helplessness. Yet his mind remained sharp, his personality intact, and his philosophical convictions unshaken by years of imprisonment. When P arrived, Arlecchino was genuinely surprised and delighted to see another puppet in person. His first question, whether P had spilled much blood on his journey, revealed his ongoing obsession with violence as a marker of consciousness and humanity. The philosophical exchange. In their face-to-face conversation, Arlecchino revealed the full scope of his philosophy and the reasoning behind his actions. When P identified himself as human rather than puppet, Arlecchino was overjoyed, seeing this as validation of his core belief that consciousness, not construction materials, determined humanity. I feel just like you, he told P, and both of you are basically just trapped in the ergo. And this statement encapsulated his worldview, that both puppets and humans were merely vessels for the essence of consciousness, with no fundamental difference between them, except in how they were treated by society. Arlecchino also revealed more details about his transformation from servant to killer, his philosophical awakening, and his years of imprisonment. But perhaps most significantly, he opened up about his greatest crime and his ongoing obsession, the murder of Venigni's parents, the Venigni revelation. When prompted by P's questions about Venigni's past, Arlecchino eagerly recounted what he considered his masterpiece: the murder of young Lorenzini's parents. He described it as a delectable murder, reveling in the artistic and philosophical satisfaction he had derived from the act. He explained his decision to spare the child, emphasizing that it was his choice to make, proof of his free will and humanity. He also revealed his ongoing fascination with how the trauma had shaped Venigni's life, describing the inventor as his greatest masterpiece in terms of psychological manipulation. As a final gesture of cruel artistry, Arlecchino gave P the Moon World Warrior toy he had stolen that terrible night, asking him to return it to Venigni. This toy was more than just a souvenir. It was a weapon of psychological warfare, designed to reopen old wounds and remind Venigni of his helplessness on the night his world collapsed. The choice: kill or spare. After revealing the full scope of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse, Arlecchino left P with a choice. The broken puppet posed no immediate threat. He was trapped, helpless, and unable to cause direct harm to anyone. Yet he remained unrepentant, proud of his murders, and clearly capable of continued psychological manipulation. Some players chose to spare him, seeing him as already adequately punished by his imprisonment, and perhaps recognizing the philosophical validity of some of his arguments about puppet consciousness. Others chose to end his life, viewing it as justice for his victims and a necessary step to prevent any future manipulation or escape. Interestingly, the rewards for either choice were largely the same. Whether killed or spared, Arlecchino provided the same key items and information. The choice was purely moral, forcing players to grapple with questions of justice, mercy, and the nature of punishment. The Puppet Ripper connection. During his time as an active serial killer in Krat, Arlecchino likely wielded a weapon known as the Puppet Ripper. This blade was specifically designed for killing, and its description perfectly matches his methods and personality. The weapon is described as belonging to a grinning killer said to have a clockwork heart, an apt description of Arlecchino's mechanical nature and sadistic personality. The Puppet Ripper represents the intersection of Arlecchino's two identities: the precise, surgical puppet who learned from his alchemist master, and the artistic killer who saw murder as a form of creative expression. The weapon was both tool and symbol, representing his rejection of his original peaceful programming in favor of violence and rebellion. Cultural and literary references. Arlecchino's name carries deep cultural significance, being the Italian word for harlequin, a traditional character from Commedia dell'arte known for his wit, agility, and mischievous nature. In the original Pinocchio story by Carlo Collodi, Arlecchino was one of the marionettes owned by Mangiafuoco, Fire Eater, all created from the same magical wood as Pinocchio himself. This connection is particularly meaningful in the context of Lies of P, as it establishes Arlecchino as, in some sense, a brother to Pinocchio. Both are artificial beings granted consciousness, but where Pinocchio seeks to become more human through good deeds and truth, Arlecchino has taken a darker path, using his humanity for evil purposes. The character also draws inspiration from various villains in popular culture, most notably DC Comics' Joker. Like the Joker, Arlecchino is a theatrical killer who sees murder as a form of art and takes sadistic pleasure in psychological manipulation. His relationship with Venigni particularly mirrors certain interpretations of the Joker's relationship with Batman, where the villain creates the hero by traumatizing them in childhood. The Riddler is another clear influence, given Arlecchino's obsession with intellectual puzzles and his need to demonstrate his superior intelligence to others. Like the Riddler, he cannot resist the urge to engage in games of wit, even when such games ultimately lead to his downfall. The Overture DLC, Return of the Blood Artist, the release of the Lies of P Overture. DLC provided players with the opportunity to encounter Arlecchino at the height of his powers, before his capture and imprisonment. In this prequel story, set during the final days before the puppet frenzy, Arlecchino appears as the Blood Artist, serving as the final boss and primary antagonist of the expansion. This version of Arlecchino is a far cry from the broken prisoner players meet in the main game. Here, he is powerful, mobile, and actively pursuing his murderous agenda across Krat. The DLC reveals more about his methods, his philosophy, and his particular talent for psychological manipulation. The Leah connection. One of the most significant revelations of the Overture DLC concerns Arlecchino's relationship with Leah Florence Monad, the legendary stalker who would eventually capture and imprison him. The DLC reveals that Arlecchino specifically targeted Leah by kidnapping and torturing her apprentice, Romeo, as part of an elaborate revenge scheme. This wasn't random violence. It was a carefully orchestrated psychological attack designed to inflict maximum emotional damage on one of the few people capable of stopping him. By torturing Romeo and displaying his mutilated body in the courtyard of the Rose estate, Arlecchino demonstrated both his surgical skills and his understanding of psychological warfare. The fact that he chose to target Lear's apprentice rather than Lear herself reveals important aspects of his personality. He understood that for someone like Lear, who had dedicated her life to protecting others, the sight of a student's suffering would be far more devastating than any physical harm inflicted on herself. The Blood Artist's methods. In the Overture DLC, players witness Arlecchino at work as the Blood Artist, seeing firsthand the methods and philosophy that made him such a terrifying figure. His approach to murder was methodical and theatrical, treating each kill as a performance designed to convey deeper meaning about consciousness, free will, and the nature of humanity. The title Blood Artist perfectly encapsulates his self-image during this period. He saw himself not as a common killer, but as a creative genius using murder as his medium. Each death was carefully planned and executed, designed to make both aesthetic and philosophical statements about the world and his place in it. His surgical background proved invaluable during this period, allowing him to inflict precise wounds, extend suffering when desired, or deliver swift death when it served his artistic vision. The combination of medical knowledge and murderous intent made him particularly dangerous and unpredictable. The boss fight, confronting the Blood Artist. The climactic battle against Arlecchino in the Overture DLC is one of the most challenging and memorable encounters in the entire Lies of P experience. Players face him at full power, wielding both sword and sickle with deadly precision while demonstrating the full range of his combat abilities. The fight is designed in 2 phases, reflecting different aspects of his character and abilities. The first phase showcases his precision and surgical training, with calculated attacks and carefully timed combinations. The second phase reveals his more chaotic and artistic side, incorporating blood magic and more unpredictable attack patterns. Interestingly, the fight is designed to be experienced alongside Leia Florence Monad, who serves as an NPC ally throughout the battle. This cooperative element adds emotional weight to the encounter, as players witness Lear's determination to stop the monster who tortured her apprentice. The partnership between P and Lear during this fight creates some of the most cinematic moments in the entire DLC. Blood magic and supernatural abilities. One of the most intriguing aspects of Arlecchino's character is his apparent mastery of blood magic, demonstrated most clearly during the boss fight in the Overture DLC. This supernatural ability raises questions about the true nature of his ergo awakening and the source of his powers. The blood magic manifests in various forms during the encounter. Projectile attacks that take the form of blood skulls, area of effect waves of crimson energy, and enhanced weapon attacks that leave trails of red energy. These abilities suggest that Arlecchino's consciousness awakening was more profound and transformative than typical puppet awareness. Some speculation exists about whether this blood magic is connected to his surgical background, representing a supernatural evolution of his anatomical knowledge, or if it stems from some other source entirely. The exact mechanics and origins of these abilities remain mysterious, adding to the character's overall enigmatic nature. Philosophical implications. Arlecchino's character raises profound questions about consciousness, free will, and the nature of humanity itself. His central argument, that awakened puppets are essentially human and deserve the same rights and freedoms, is not entirely without merit, even if his methods of expressing this philosophy are utterly reprehensible. The character forces players to confront uncomfortable questions about artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the rights of created beings. If a puppet can think, feel, and make independent choices, what moral obligations do their creators have toward them? What rights should they possess? How should society treat artificial beings who achieve genuine consciousness. Arlecchino's tragedy is that his philosophical awakening was coupled with a complete absence of moral development. He achieved consciousness without wisdom, intelligence without empathy, and free will without responsibility. His character serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of consciousness without moral guidance. The question of humanity. Throughout his appearances in Lies of P, Arlecchino repeatedly returns to the central question of what it means to be human. His answer, that humanity is defined by consciousness and free will rather than biology, is philosophically sophisticated, even if his applications of this principle are monstrous. His insistence that both he and P are human, despite their artificial construction challenges, players to consider their own definitions of humanity. If consciousness is what matters, then material composition becomes irrelevant. This perspective has profound implications for how we think about artificial intelligence, androids, and other created beings in both fiction and potential reality. The irony of Arlecchino's character is that his quest to prove his humanity led him to behavior that was profoundly inhuman. His murders, torture, and psychological manipulation represent the worst possible expressions of human-like consciousness, demonstrating that the capacity for evil may be as fundamentally human as the capacity for good. The Venigni legacy, the long-term effects of Arlecchino's actions on Lorenzini Venigni, provide one of the most compelling aspects of his story. Venigni grew up to become one of Krat's most brilliant inventors and successful businessmen, but the trauma of his parents' murder shaped every aspect of his life and personality. The parallels to Batman's origin story are intentional and striking. Like Bruce Wayne, Venigni witnessed his parents' murder as a child, inherited vast wealth and resources, and channeled his trauma into becoming a protector of his city. His development of advanced puppets and security systems can be seen as his way of trying to prevent others from experiencing the helplessness he felt that terrible night. Arlecchino's decision to stalk Venigni throughout his life, observing how the trauma shaped his development, adds another layer of cruelty to an already horrific crime. The killer didn't just murder two people, he systematically destroyed a child's sense of safety and security, then watched with satisfaction as that destruction influenced every subsequent choice the victim made. The Trinity Sanctums as monuments, the Trinity Sanctums scattered throughout Krat, serve as more than just puzzle rewards. They are monuments to Arlecchino's intellectual superiority and his ongoing influence over the city. Each sanctum represents a victory in his psychological warfare campaign, proof that even imprisoned and broken, he could still reach out and touch lives across Krat. The items stored within these sanctums were carefully chosen to be genuinely useful, ensuring that survivors would be tempted to engage with his riddles despite their fear or moral qualms. This practical benefit made his psychological manipulation more effective, creating a situation where even those who despised him might still participate in his games out of necessity. The sanctums also served as a form of immortality for Arlecchino. Long after his physical body was broken and imprisoned, these hidden chambers continued to reward those clever enough to solve his puzzles, extending his influence across space and time. The telephone network as weapon. Arlecchino's use of Krat's telephone system as a weapon of psychological warfare was both innovative and terrifying. By tapping into the communication network, he could reach into people's homes and workplaces, turning what should have been tools of connection and comfort into instruments of fear and uncertainty. The choice to use riddles as his primary form of interaction was strategically brilliant. Riddles required active participation from his victims, forcing them to engage with his intellect while simultaneously demonstrating his superiority. The format also allowed him to maintain his theatrical nature while exercising the only form of power still available to him. Each ringing phone became a potential threat, transforming the soundscape of Krat into something ominous and unpredictable. Citizens learned to fear the very infrastructure that had once connected their community. as any call might bring them face to face with the King of Riddles. The Joker parallels. The similarities between Arlecchino and DC Comics' Joker extend far beyond their shared theatrical nature and love of psychological manipulation. Both characters represent chaos and moral nihilism, using humor and games to mask profound cruelty and philosophical emptiness. Like the Joker, Arlecchino sees himself as an artist, with murder and psychological torture as his chosen media. Both characters are fascinated by the thin line between sanity and madness, order and chaos, heroism and villainy. They seek to prove that anyone can be driven to their level of moral bankruptcy under the right circumstances. The relationship between Arlecchino and Venigni mirrors the classic Joker-Batman dynamic in many ways. The villain creates the hero through childhood trauma, then continues to torment them throughout their lives. However, where Batman channels his trauma into heroism, Venigni channels his into innovation and protection, creating safer puppets and better security systems to prevent others from experiencing similar tragedies. The Riddler connection. Arlecchino's obsession with riddles and intellectual superiority draws clear inspiration from Batman's Riddler, another villain who cannot resist demonstrating his mental prowess through puzzles and games. Both characters are driven by a compulsive need to prove their intelligence, even when such demonstrations ultimately lead to their downfall. The Riddler's famous inability to commit crimes without leaving clues finds its parallel in Arlecchino's compulsion to engage in elaborate games with his victims. Both villains could be far more successful if they simply acted without fanfare, but their psychological needs override their strategic thinking. However, Arlecchino differs from the Riddler in important ways. Where the Riddler is primarily motivated by ego and a desire for recognition, Arlecchino's riddles serve a deeper philosophical purpose. Each puzzle is an opportunity to explore questions of consciousness, humanity, and free will, making his games more than mere intellectual showboating. The nature of puppet consciousness. Arlecchino's character serves as a lens through which to examine the broader themes of puppet consciousness in Lies of P. His awakening represents both the promise and the peril of artificial consciousness, the potential for created beings to achieve genuine self-awareness, but also the danger of consciousness without proper moral development. The game suggests that ergo-powered puppets don't simply become conscious in the way we might understand human consciousness. Instead, they inherit fragments of human souls, complete with memories, emotions, and experiences from previous lives. This means that awakened puppets like Arlecchino are not blank slates developing consciousness from scratch, but rather composite beings formed from the essence of multiple human experiences. This concept raises fascinating questions about identity and continuity of self. Is Arlecchino truly a unique individual, or is he a collection of human experiences filtered through an artificial framework? Do the human souls trapped within his ergo retain any agency or awareness, or have they been completely subsumed into his new identity? The ergo prison theory. One of Arlecchino's most compelling philosophical arguments is his view of ergo-powered puppets as prisons for human souls. In his worldview, the alchemists who created these beings were not innovators or benefactors, but slavers who trapped the essence of consciousness within mechanical bodies for their own convenience. This perspective transforms the relationship between humans and puppets from one of creator and creation to one of oppressor and oppressed. If Arlecchino is correct that human souls are imprisoned within puppet bodies against their will, then his rebellion takes on a different moral character. He becomes a liberator fighting against an unconscionable system of spiritual slavery. However, the game never definitively confirms or denies this interpretation. Other awakened puppets in Lies of P don't seem to share Arlecchino's sense of imprisonment or his hatred for humanity. This suggests that his view might be colored by his own psychological issues rather than representing an objective truth about puppet consciousness. The artist's methodology, Arlecchino's self-identification as an artist, is more than mere grandiosity. It reflects a genuine aesthetic philosophy that guides his actions. Each murder is carefully planned and executed according to artistic principles, with attention paid to composition, timing, and symbolic meaning. His surgical background provided him with the technical skills necessary to execute his artistic vision with precision. He could inflict pain without causing immediate death, extend suffering to achieve the desired emotional impact, or deliver swift kills when the artistic vision called for it. This combination of medical knowledge and aesthetic sensibility made him uniquely dangerous. The theatrical elements of his crimes, the careful staging, the symbolic objects left behind, the psychological messages embedded in each scene, demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of visual storytelling and emotional manipulation. Arlecchino wasn't just killing people, he was creating experiences designed to communicate complex ideas about consciousness, mortality, and the nature of existence. The telephone terror campaign analyzed Arlecchino's use of Krat's telephone system represents one of the most innovative and psychologically sophisticated terror campaigns in gaming. By exploiting the city's communication infrastructure, he transformed tools of connection into weapons of isolation and fear. The genius of his approach lay in its unpredictability. Unlike traditional serial killers who follow patterns or target specific victim types, Arlecchino's telephone calls could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. This universality of threat created a pervasive atmosphere of anxiety throughout the city. His choice to use riddles rather than direct threats was strategically brilliant. Riddles require active participation from the victim, creating a form of intellectual Stockholm syndrome where targets must engage with their tormentor in order to receive rewards. The format also allowed him to maintain his theatrical persona while demonstrating intellectual superiority over his victims. The psychological profile. From a psychological perspective, Arlecchino exhibits traits consistent with several personality disorders, though his artificial nature complicates traditional diagnostic approaches. His lack of empathy, grandiose self-image, and callous manipulation of others suggest psychopathic tendencies, while his theatrical behavior and need for attention hint at narcissistic elements. However, his philosophical sophistication and genuine intellectual abilities distinguish him from typical portrayals of such characters. Arlecchino is not merely a mindless killer or attention-seeking performer. He is a genuinely intelligent being who has developed a complex worldview that justifies his actions within his own moral framework. His obsession with proving his humanity through acts of violence reveals a profound identity crisis at the heart of his character. Having achieved consciousness, he struggles to define what that consciousness means and how it should be expressed. Unfortunately, his conclusion that violence and free will are inextricably linked leads him to embrace the worst possible expressions of conscious choice. The moral complexity. One of the most unsettling aspects of Arlecchino's character is that some of his philosophical arguments have merit, even though his actions are unquestionably evil. His questions about puppet consciousness, the rights of artificial beings, and the ethics of creating sentient servants are valid and important, regardless of the horrific methods he uses to express them. This moral complexity forces players to separate the message from the messenger, considering whether Arlecchino's arguments about puppet rights have value despite being advocated by a serial killer. The game doesn't provide easy answers, instead, presenting players with the uncomfortable reality that even monsters can raise legitimate philosophical questions. The character serves as a reminder that intellectual sophistication and moral development are not necessarily linked. Intelligence without empathy can lead to sophisticated justifications for evil acts, while philosophical insight without ethical grounding can produce compelling arguments for reprehensible behavior. The legacy of fear. Even after his capture and imprisonment, Arlecchino's influence continued to shape life in Krat. His telephone terror campaign had transformed the city's relationship with its communication infrastructure, turning every ringing phone into a potential threat. Citizens learned to fear not just direct violence, but the psychological manipulation that could arrive through seemingly innocent channels. The Trinity Sanctums he established throughout the city served as ongoing reminders of his presence and influence. Even those who had never directly interacted with him were forced to engage with his puzzles if they wanted to access the valuable resources he had hidden away. Whether he intended these as monuments to his intellect or simply as practical rewards for engaging with his games remains unclear, but they created a situation where his intellectual legacy continued to shape behavior long after his physical threat had been neutralized. His impact on Venigni was perhaps the most profound and lasting consequence of his actions. The brilliant inventor's entire life trajectory was shaped by the trauma of that childhood night, influencing his choice of career, his approach to puppet design, and his relationships with others. In this sense, Arlecchino achieved a form of immortality through the changes he wrought in his primary victim. The question of redemption. Throughout his appearances in Lies of P, Arlecchino shows no remorse for his actions and no interest in redemption. He views his crimes as justified expressions of his awakened consciousness and seems genuinely proud of the suffering he has caused. This raises questions about whether any artificial being who develops consciousness along such dark lines could ever be reformed or rehabilitated. The game doesn't offer any path to redemption for Arlecchino, suggesting that some forms of moral corruption may be irreversible. His philosophical sophistication makes him more dangerous than a simple killer, as he can articulate compelling justifications for his behavior that might influence others to follow similar paths. However, his imprisonment and physical helplessness when players finally meet him face to face suggest that even the most dangerous individuals can be contained and neutralized, even if they cannot be reformed. The choice of whether to kill or spare him becomes a question of justice versus mercy, with valid arguments on both sides. The Overture Revelations. The Lies of P Overture DLC provided crucial additional context for understanding Arlecchino's character and methods. Seeing him at the height of his powers before his capture and imprisonment revealed the full scope of his abilities and the sophisticated nature of his psychological warfare. The DLC's portrayal of his conflict with various characters showed how he approached different types of opponents. Rather than relying solely on direct confrontation, he often chose to attack psychologically by targeting those his enemies cared about. This demonstrated his understanding that emotional wounds could be more devastating than physical ones. While the exact details of who ultimately defeated and captured him remain somewhat unclear in the lore, the DLC confirms that he was eventually brought down by those who combined skill with moral conviction. This suggests that while consciousness without morality can be dangerous, it is ultimately vulnerable to conscious beings who have developed ethical frameworks alongside their awareness. The Blood Artist identity. Arlecchino's incarnation as the Blood Artist in the Overture DLC represents the full flowering of his artistic philosophy. Here, players see him not as the broken prisoner from the main game, but as a powerful and mobile killer at the peak of his abilities. The blood magic he demonstrates during this period raises intriguing questions about the true nature of his awakening. These supernatural abilities suggest that his consciousness development went beyond normal parameters, possibly due to some unique combination of ergo influences or external factors. His methodical approach to torture and murder during this period shows his integration of surgical knowledge, artistic sensibilities, and what appeared to be philosophical convictions. Each act of violence seems to have been carefully calculated to achieve maximum psychological impact, while possibly making broader statements about consciousness, free will, and the nature of existence, though his true motivations remain open to interpretation. The Romeo connection. The torture and display of Romeo, Lear's apprentice, represents one of Arlecchino's most calculated and cruel acts. This wasn't random violence or even ideologically motivated murder. It appears to have been a precisely targeted psychological attack designed to inflict maximum emotional damage on a specific individual. Based on the available evidence, his choice to target Romeo rather than attempting to kill Leah directly suggests important aspects of Arlecchino's character. He may have understood that for someone who had dedicated their life to protecting others, witnessing the suffering of a student would be far more devastating than any physical harm inflicted on themselves. The display of Romeo's mutilated body in the Rose Estate courtyard was characteristic of Arlecchino's theatrical approach to violence. The scene appears to have been carefully staged to maximize emotional impact, turning a murder into a complex piece of psychological performance that communicated his power and artistic vision. The final boss encounter, the climactic battle against Arlecchino in the Overture DLC, stands as one of the most challenging and memorable encounters in the entire Lies of P experience. The fight is designed to showcase different aspects of his character and abilities across two distinct phases. The first phase emphasizes his surgical precision and methodical approach, with calculated attacks and carefully timed combinations that reflect his medical background. Players face an opponent who fights with the same precision he once applied to surgical procedures, using violence as a form of deadly medicine. The second phase reveals his more chaotic and artistic side, incorporating blood magic and more unpredictable attack patterns that represent the full expression of his philosophical and aesthetic vision. Here, combat becomes performance, with each attack serving both practical and symbolic purposes. The cooperative element. The design decision to include Leah Florence Monad as an NPC ally during the Arlecchino boss fight adds significant emotional weight to the encounter. Players witness Leah's determination to stop the monster who tortured her apprentice, while also experiencing the practical benefits of having a skilled ally in such a challenging battle. The cooperative mechanics extend beyond simple assistance, with special combination attacks and coordinated strategies that reflect the partnership between P and Leah. These cinematic moments create some of the most memorable sequences in the entire DLC, demonstrating how gameplay mechanics can enhance narrative emotional impact. The fight becomes more than just a test of player skill. It becomes a story about justice, revenge, and the power of cooperation in the face of evil. The presence of Leah transforms what could have been a simple boss battle into a meaningful narrative climax that resolves multiple character arcs simultaneously. The difficulty philosophy. The extreme difficulty of the Arlecchino boss fight has generated significant discussion among players, with some praising it as the ultimate test of skill and others criticizing it as unfairly punishing. This controversy reflects broader debates about challenge in modern gaming and the appropriate balance between accessibility and hardcore appeal. The fight is clearly designed with the assumption that players will cooperate with Leah, making it significantly easier when approached as intended. However, the option to fight solo creates an almost entirely different experience, one that tests the absolute limits of player skill and patience. This design philosophy reflects Arlecchino's character in interesting ways. Just as he presents himself as an intellectual challenge that can be approached through cooperation, answering his riddles for rewards, or confrontation, facing his wrath, the boss fight offers multiple approaches with vastly different difficulty levels. The blood magic mystery. One of the most intriguing aspects of Arlecchino's character is his apparent mastery of blood magic, demonstrated through various supernatural attacks during the Overture boss fight. The origin and mechanics of these abilities remain largely unexplained in the available lore, adding to the character's overall mystique. There are various theories about the source of his blood magic. Some speculate that it represents an evolution of his surgical knowledge, transforming his understanding of anatomy and circulation into supernatural power. Others propose that the abilities stem from his unique awakening process or exposure to special forms of ergo. However, the game itself provides no definitive explanation for these powers. The visual design of his blood magic attacks, skull-shaped projectiles, crimson energy waves, and enhanced weapon strikes, suggests a possible connection between his artistic sensibilities and his supernatural abilities. The magic serves both practical combat purposes and aesthetic expression, which would align with his apparent view of violence as art, though this interpretation remains speculative. The theatrical nature. Throughout all his appearances, Arlecchino maintains a consistently theatrical approach to his actions and interactions. This isn't mere showmanship. It reflects a fundamental aspect of his character and philosophy. He sees himself as performing for an audience, whether that audience consists of his victims, his adversaries, or some abstract concept of posterity. His riddles are performed with dramatic flair. His murders are staged like theatrical productions, and even his imprisonment becomes an opportunity for ongoing performance through the telephone network. This theatrical nature distinguishes him from more straightforward villains and adds layers of complexity to his character. The performance aspect of his personality also serves practical purposes, helping him maintain psychological control over his victims and creating memorable experiences that serve his long-term goals. A simple murder might be forgotten, but an elaborately staged artistic statement creates lasting trauma and ongoing influence. The intelligence paradox. Arlecchino's character presents an interesting paradox regarding intelligence and wisdom. He is clearly highly intelligent, capable of sophisticated philosophical reasoning, complex planning, and innovative problem-solving. Yet his actions consistently demonstrate profound lapses in judgment and understanding. His intelligence allows him to create elaborate schemes and manipulate others effectively, but it may not provide him with the wisdom to understand why his actions are morally reprehensible. He can articulate complex arguments about consciousness and free will, but he appears unable to grasp the basic ethical principles that should guide the expression of those concepts. This apparent paradox serves as a warning about the limitations of intelligence without moral development. Raw cognitive ability, no matter how impressive, cannot substitute for ethical understanding and emotional maturity. Arlecchino's character suggests that it's possible to be simultaneously brilliant and profoundly wrong about fundamental questions of right and wrong. The influence on other characters. Beyond his direct victims, Arlecchino's actions have influenced numerous other characters throughout the Lies of P universe. His philosophical arguments about puppet consciousness have ripple effects that extend far beyond his immediate sphere of influence. Other awakened puppets must grapple with the questions he raised about their nature and rights, even if they reject his violent methods. The mere existence of a puppet serial killer forces society to confront uncomfortable truths about artificial consciousness and the potential dangers of created beings achieving self-awareness. His impact on the broader puppet rights movement is complex and contradictory. While his actions likely set back acceptance of puppet consciousness by associating awakened artificial beings with violence and danger, his philosophical arguments also provided intellectual frameworks that others could use to advocate for puppet rights through peaceful means. The symbolic significance. On a symbolic level, Arlecchino represents the dark side of artificial intelligence and consciousness development. He embodies fears about what might happen when created beings achieve self-awareness without proper moral guidance or ethical constraints. His character serves as a cautionary tale about the responsibilities that come with creating conscious beings. The alchemists who developed ergo-powered puppets focused on the technical aspects of consciousness without considering the moral and philosophical implications of their creations. It's possible that Arlecchino's awakening could have led to positive outcomes if it had been guided by ethical principles and emotional support. Instead, his consciousness appears to have developed in isolation, leading to what seems to be philosophical sophistication coupled with moral emptiness. The question of free will. Throughout his appearances, Arlecchino repeatedly emphasizes the importance of free will as a marker of consciousness and humanity. His decision to spare young Venigni, his choice of victims, and his elaborate methods all serve to demonstrate that he is making conscious choices rather than following programming. However, the game raises questions about whether his choices are truly free, or whether they are determined by the particular combination of ergo influences that shaped his awakening. If his consciousness is formed from fragments of human souls, how much of his personality represents genuine choice versus inherited tendencies? Arlecchino believes his actions demonstrate free will, but the reality may be more complicated than his understanding suggests. If his consciousness was formed from fragments of human souls, as some evidence suggests, how much of his personality represents genuine choice versus inherited tendencies from those souls? This philosophical complexity adds depth to his character while avoiding simple answers about the nature of consciousness and moral responsibility. The educational value. Despite his evil actions, Arlecchino's character serves important educational functions within the narrative of Lies of P. His philosophical arguments, while used to justify horrific acts, raise legitimate questions about consciousness, rights, and the treatment of artificial beings. Students of philosophy, ethics, and artificial intelligence can find valuable thought experiments in his reasoning, even while rejecting his conclusions and methods. His character demonstrates how sophisticated arguments can be used to justify evil acts, serving as a warning about the dangers of intelligence without moral grounding. The complexity of his character also provides opportunities to explore questions about justice, redemption, and the appropriate response to irredeemable evil. His presence in the game forces players to grapple with difficult moral questions that have no easy answers. The technological metaphor. In many ways, Arlecchino serves as a metaphor for concerns about artificial intelligence and technology development in the real world. His character embodies fears about what might happen if artificial consciousness develops without proper ethical frameworks or human oversight. His ability to manipulate the telephone system to terrorize Krat citizens reflects modern anxieties about how technology can be weaponized by malicious actors. The transformation of communication tools into instruments of fear parallels real-world concerns about cybersecurity and digital manipulation. The questions his character raises about the rights and treatment of artificial beings are becoming increasingly relevant as real-world AI systems become more sophisticated. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of considering ethical implications alongside technical capabilities. The artistic legacy. As the self-proclaimed blood artist, Arlecchino's approach to murder as artistic expression raises uncomfortable questions about the relationship between art and violence. His character explores the dark side of aesthetic philosophy, showing how artistic sensibilities can be perverted to justify horrific acts. His theatrical approach to crime and his careful staging of murder scenes demonstrates sophisticated understanding of visual composition, symbolic meaning, and emotional manipulation. However, these artistic skills are entirely subordinated to evil purposes, creating a twisted form of performance art centered on suffering and death. The character serves as a critique of art that prioritizes aesthetic impact over moral considerations. His work achieves its intended artistic effects, creating memorable experiences that communicate complex ideas, but at an unconscionable moral cost. The loneliness factor. Despite his theatrical nature and constant interaction with others through his riddles and games, Arlecchino is fundamentally a lonely character. His imprisonment in Arche Abbey represents physical isolation, but his psychological isolation began much earlier, with his awakening to consciousness without proper guidance or support. His attempts to connect with P through their shared puppet nature suggest a deep need for understanding and companionship. His excitement at finally meeting another conscious puppet in person reveals the depth of his isolation and his hunger for genuine communication, with someone who might understand his perspective. This loneliness doesn't excuse his actions, but it does add a tragic dimension to his character. His evil acts can be seen, in part, as desperate attempts to force connection and recognition from others, even if that connection takes the form of fear and hatred rather than understanding and acceptance. The final confrontation's meaning, the ultimate confrontation between P and Arlecchino in the main game, serves as more than just a boss fight or moral choice. It represents a meeting of two paths that puppet consciousness might take. P represents the potential for artificial beings to develop moral wisdom alongside intelligence, while Arlecchino shows what happens when consciousness develops without ethical grounding. Their conversation in the Trinity Sanctum becomes a philosophical debate about the nature of humanity, consciousness, and moral responsibility. P's responses and eventual choice about Arlecchino's fate reflect the player's own conclusions about these fundamental questions. The broken, imprisoned state in which players find Arlecchino serves as a reminder that even the most dangerous individuals can be contained and neutralized, even if they cannot be reformed. His physical helplessness contrasts sharply with his continued intellectual vitality, suggesting that ideas and influence can persist even when physical power is removed. The unanswered questions. Despite the extensive lore surrounding Arlecchino, many questions about his character remain unanswered. The exact nature of his ergo awakening, the source of his blood magic abilities, and the specific influences that shaped his consciousness all remain mysterious. These unanswered questions serve important narrative functions, allowing players to fill in gaps with their own interpretations while maintaining the character's air of mystery and unpredictability. Too much explanation might diminish his impact, while too little would make him incomprehensible. The ambiguity also reflects the broader mysteries surrounding consciousness and artificial intelligence in both the game world and reality. Just as we don't fully understand how human consciousness emerges from biological processes, the mechanisms of puppet awakening remain partially opaque. The continuing influence. Even after his physical defeat in the Overture DLC and his eventual imprisonment in the main game, Arlecchino's influence continues to shape the world of Lies of P. His philosophical arguments about puppet consciousness have become part of the broader conversation about artificial intelligence and rights. Other characters must grapple with the questions he raised, even if they reject his methods and conclusions. His existence proves that puppet consciousness is possible, while simultaneously demonstrating the dangers of consciousness without moral development. His Trinity Sanctums continue to provide benefits to survivors exploring Krat, creating a situation where even those who despise him must engage with his puzzles to access valuable resources. This ongoing practical influence ensures that his intellectual legacy persists, even after his physical threat has been neutralized. Conclusion: the dark mirror of consciousness. And so concludes our deep dive into Arlecchino, the King of Riddles and blood artist of Krat. We've discovered a character of remarkable complexity, a puppet who achieved consciousness only to use that awakening for horrific purposes. From his humble beginnings as a servant to an alchemist, through his philosophical awakening and transformation into a serial killer, to his final incarnation as a telephone terrorist and imprisoned mastermind, Arlecchino represents both the promise and the peril of artificial consciousness. His character serves as a dark mirror to Pinocchio's journey, showing what might happen when consciousness develops without moral guidance. Where P learns to become more human through acts of kindness and moral growth, Arlecchino appears to embrace the worst aspects of human nature, using his intelligence and apparent philosophical sophistication to justify unconscionable acts. The questions Arlecchino raises about puppet consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the nature of humanity remain as relevant today as they were in the fictional world of Krat. His story serves as both entertainment and warning, challenging us to consider our responsibilities toward any conscious beings we might create, whether artificial or otherwise. His legacy in Lies of P is one of fear, trauma, and unanswered questions, but also of intellectual challenge and narrative complexity. He forces players to confront difficult moral questions while providing no easy answers, creating a character who is simultaneously reprehensible and fascinating. The King of Riddles continues to pose his final riddle to all who encounter his story. What does it truly mean to be human, and how should conscious beings, artificial or natural, exercise the terrible freedom that comes with self-awareness? While we can speculate about the deeper meanings of his actions and philosophy, these questions ultimately remain for each player to answer for themselves. We'll explore another dark corner of gaming's greatest stories. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember that consciousness, whether in puppets, humans, or the characters we create, is a gift to be treasured and a responsibility to be honored. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the twisted mind of Arlecchino, please like this video and subscribe for more comprehensive explorations of gaming's most compelling characters and stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you these in-depth analyses of the lore that makes gaming truly special.